He pointed a loaded gun at my son on our front lawn in broad daylight, all over a bird feeder. And Susan, she stood behind him with her HOA clipboard and that smug, lemon-sucking grin she wore like perfume. You see, in our charming little subdivision of Willow Creek Estates, where the grass is regulated and your mailbox color must be approved, we somehow ended up with a self-appointed HOA president who acted more like a dictator with a yardstick than a neighbor with a clipboard. And the man with the gun? Oh, that was her boyfriend, a part-time sheriff's deputy with a full-time ego and zero sense of boundaries. They thought they were in charge of this place until they picked a fight with the wrong veteran. Because what Susan didn't know was that my son isn't just some quiet guy back from overseas. He's special forces, trained, calm under pressure, and yes, legally armed. And what came next? Well, let's just say Willow Creek Estates was never the same. I moved into Willow Creek Estates for the peace, the quiet, the cul-de-sacs, trimmed hedges, and monthly potlucks with overcooked casseroles and suspiciously identical pies. My husband and I had just retired, and this neighborhood promised a calm place to sip coffee, feed the birds, and maybe die in peace. But no one warned us about Susan. She started small, passive-aggressive notes about our flagpole being too tall per HOA Code 4.3, complaints that our garden gnome was non-compliant ornamentation. We laughed it off, thought maybe she was just bored or lonely. But boredom doesn't explain the fines we started getting. $7 for a non-regulation mailbox handle, $200 for unauthorized paint tone variation on garage trim. She had power, she knew it, and she used it like a blunt object. Susan was the kind of woman who ran for HOA president unopposed, then rewrote the rules so no one else could run. She chaired every meeting, rewrote voting procedures, and shut down any neighbor who dared question her vision. She wasn't a neighbor, she was a regime. And then she met Carl, her cop boyfriend. He wasn't officially part of the HOA, of course, but suddenly he was everywhere, patrolling the block in his cruiser, checking on things, knocking on doors under the guise of code enforcement. Some neighbors liked the attention. Others started locking their gates. Then my son came home. Ethan, quiet, keeps to himself, mows my lawn every Sunday, and says ma'am to everyone, even the cat. Susan didn't like him, said he looked intimidating, said his truck was oversized for community specs, said our American flag was hostile imagery. We ignored her until the fines started stacking, until Carl showed up on our lawn. That day, Ethan was hanging a bird feeder from the old oak. I was on the porch. Susan came striding up the sidewalk like she owned the pavement. Carl 2 steps behind her with his mirrored sunglasses and badge on display. She said we were in violation of Code 6. 8B, unauthorized wildlife attraction devices. Ethan turned, birdseed still in hand, and asked, "You serious?" That's when Carl reached for his holster, pulled the damn thing and pointed it at my son. And Ethan? He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just looked at the man with a calm so terrifying it made my skin crawl. Then he smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that says, "You just made the biggest mistake of your HOA career. If pointing a gun at my son was the crescendo, let's rewind to the overture." Because, like all great tragedies, this one started with petty complaints, a garden hose, and one very territorial hummingbird. Let me explain. Back before Carl showed up with his weaponized ego and mirrored shades, Susan had already begun what I call her reign of mild tyranny. She took over the HOA board 2 years ago, unopposed, naturally, because no one else wanted the job. That was our first mistake. At first, she did the usual HOA dance, newsletters, holiday banners, passive-aggressive reminders about garbage bins. But once she tasted power, it was like watching a suburban Napoleon rise to the throne. She rewrote bylaws, like she was carving commandments into stone tablets. The neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates, was your standard retirement cul-de-sac, quiet, predictable, full of people who put up Christmas decorations on November honest and wave politely while judging your lawn height from behind their blinds. Susan was perfect for it. She was also the kind of woman who wore a visor unironically, walked a schnauzer named Muffin, and printed out citations for ornamental disobedience. And yes, that was her actual phrasing when she fined the Thompsons for having a lawn gnome dressed like Elvis. Susan's compliance crusade. The first time I knew we were in trouble was when she showed up at my door with a tape measure. "I'm just checking your mailbox," she said cheerily. It looks like it's half an inch too high, and unfortunately code 3.4. I stopped listening. She fined us $50. A week later, she fined us again, this time for unauthorized hose visibility. Apparently, my green garden hose disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Never mind that I was watering roses in 90 heat. Susan had decided that hoses should be neutral tones only. That was strike 2. Strike 3 came when Ethan came home from deployment. He'd served 4 tours, special forces, saw things no human should, and yet the only thing that rattled him was HOA drama. When he parked his F-250 in our driveway, Susan pounced like a hawk, spotting a mouse in an unapproved flower beds. "It's too wide," she said. "The tires exceed the parking boundary lines by 2 inches, and we do not allow vehicles that size overnight." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean the truck that's legally parked on my family's private property?" Susan smiled like someone who'd just discovered a loophole. "It's technically common property. If the front tires cross the curb, we'll be issuing a $170 fine." Ethan didn't say a word, just nodded. Calm, too calm. And that's when I started getting nervous. The cop, the clipboard, and the creepy random inspections. Then came Carl, part-time deputy, full-time walking lawsuit. Suddenly, random inspections became a thing. Carl and Susan walked the neighborhood together, armed with clipboards, cameras, and what I swear was a laminated HOA Bible. They knocked on doors, snapped photos, and cited people for everything from faded shutters to non-compliant porch cushions. Susan claimed it was beautification enforcement. We called it what it was, suburban surveillance. Ethan, he kept quiet, but every night I saw him on his laptop, typing, watching, researching. Turns out, HOA bylaws are public record, and Ethan had a long memory and a longer folder full of screenshots, dates, and Susan's very questionable decisions. The turning point, bird feeder insurrection. Things escalated when Ethan hung a bird feeder on our oak tree. It was his way of coping, quiet mornings, coffee in hand, just watching cardinals and blue jays flap around in peace. Susan hated it. "It's not HOA approved," she said. Code 6, 8B, no wildlife attracting devices. Ethan pointed at 3 other houses with feeders. "You find them," she grinned. "They're on the list." 3 days later, a fine arrived in the mail, $300. But Ethan didn't flinch. He just said, "Okay," which, in Ethan's speak, means something is coming, and something did. Operation Pine Straw. Susan installed surveillance cameras on HOA property, aimed directly at our house. She claimed it was for community security, but they only pointed one way, at us. We responded by planting pine straw all over the front yard, HOA legal, of course. Ethan triple-checked. Susan accused us of landscape aggression. Then she held an emergency board meeting, which she chaired with no one else present, and proposed a rule: no natural mulch without prior approval. It passed, 1 vote to 0. Ethan appealed. She denied it. He appealed again. She fined us $500. That's when I found him in the garage, polishing a folder of documents thicker than a phone book. I asked what he was doing. "Just preparing," he said. Sometimes the quiet guy in the room is just the one who hasn't spoken yet. The neighborhood begins to crack. We weren't the only ones. The Thompsons were fined for using unapproved window tinting. The Clarks got a violation for flag placement proximity. Even poor Miss S. Larson, who's 84 and blind in one eye, got written up for excessive bird bath algae, but people were afraid to speak out. Susan had manipulated proxy votes, rewritten meeting rules, and made herself president for life. She had Carl. She had the bylaws. She had a clipboard with more power than sense. But what she didn't have was Ethan. And Ethan, he had something better than a clipboard. He had training. He had patience. And he had evidence. Because while Susan was measuring grass blades with a ruler, Ethan had been quietly gathering video, documentation, and witnesses, all by the book, all admissible and all ready for something she never saw coming: a formal federal complaint. But that's for next time. By the time summer rolled around, Willow Creek Estates didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a Cold War. Neighbors spoke in whispers. Lawns were trimmed with military precision, not out of pride, but fear. You could practically feel Susan's clipboard breathing down your neck. And just when we thought she'd finally run out of rules to invent, she found a new target: our dog. Now listen, Buddy is a 12-year-old golden retriever with arthritis, and a fear of squirrels. He wouldn't bite a biscuit without permission, but that didn't stop Susan from filing an animal aggression complaint because he barked once, not at a child, not at a neighbor, at a squirrel. She claimed it was a noise disruption in violation of Code 7.12. She issued us a $200 fine and said, "One more incident, and animal control will be notified." That was the moment I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan clenched his jaw. Let me be clear. My son has been through things he doesn't talk about. He's been in villages where no one comes back whole. He's led missions that don't get written down. And yet, the only time I've seen his hands shake was when Susan threatened his dog. That night he printed out every HOA code ever written. He highlighted every violation Susan had ever overlooked on her own property. Illegal pavers, 2 trash bins instead of 1, a backyard shed with no permit. And then he did something I'll never forget. He knocked on the neighbors' doors. The quiet ones start speaking. Turns out, Ethan wasn't the only one keeping records. The Clarks had audio of Carl making inappropriate comments during a compliance walk. The Thompsons had footage of Susan digging up their decorative plants, which she'd later fine them for being dead. Even sweet Miss S. Larson had saved every citation she'd gotten, 27 in total, all suspiciously vague. Ethan took it all, compiled it into a 48-page dossier, labeled and time-stamped. Then he drove it to the county HOA regulatory office. Turns out, when an HOA starts abusing its authority and multiple households come forward with documented proof, people start listening, especially when one of those people is a decorated veteran with connections in federal oversight. Ethan filed an official complaint, citing abuse of power, conflict of interest, and possible civil rights violations. And he wasn't done. The emergency meeting that wasn't so private. A week later, Susan called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. She didn't invite us, of course not. But Ethan showed up anyway. He brought his uniform not to intimidate, not to threaten, just to remind them who he was. Someone who fought for the very freedoms Susan was trying to choke with her laminated bylaw binder. He sat in the back row, silent, while Susan stood at the podium, ranting about non-compliant residents, subversive attitudes, and the need for tighter control. Then he raised his hand and asked one simple question. "Madam President, can you explain how HOA funds were used to pay for the surveillance cameras pointed exclusively at my family's home, without community vote, without notice, and without legal permit?" Susan blinked. Someone in the room gasped. Ethan pulled out a printed bank record. Page 6. HOA check number 4,889, security equipment purchased using community funds, installed without authorization. Susan stammered something about emergency powers, but the room had already shifted. The muttering started. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "She used our money for that." Ethan leaned back, didn't say another word. He didn't have to. The final straw, aka the front lawn incident. Susan didn't take it well. The very next morning, Carl showed up again, this time with 2 other officers. They claimed they were responding to a community safety report. They marched onto our property, demanded Ethan remove the flagpole we'd had up for 8 years, suddenly now considered a hazard. Ethan refused. Carl stepped forward, and that's when it happened. Carl unholstered his weapon, pointed it straight at Ethan, no warning, no cause, just rage and embarrassment wrapped in a badge. Susan stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, smiling like she'd just won a game she didn't understand. And Ethan? He didn't move, didn't flinch. He calmly said, "This is all being recorded," which it was 3 different angles. Our doorbell cam, Ethan's own chest cam, and a neighbor across the street with her phone aimed right at Carl. What Susan and Carl didn't know, Ethan had filed a restraining order request 2 days prior and was granted a temporary protective order just that morning, which meant Carl was in violation of a court order the moment he stepped onto our property. And he'd just committed assault with a deadly weapon, caught on video. Within the hour, county deputies, real ones, were at our door. They didn't come for Ethan. They came for Carl. He was cuffed right there on our lawn. Susan screamed, tried to block the view, claimed Ethan had set them up, but nobody believed her anymore. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some came outside and clapped. And Susan's clipboard, it slipped from her hand, hit the pavement, and stayed there. Ethan picked it up, read the top page, then smiled. Because guess what? Susan had illegally signed off on her own monthly HOA paycheck, 3 times the amount legally allowed. We didn't even have to report it. The investigators would handle that part. The thing about Susan, she never thought she'd lose, because people like her clipboard tyrants in yoga pants, power-tripping through bylaws, don't plan for defeat. They plan for domination, for unchecked control, for ruling over plastic flamingos and patio furniture like suburban royalty. But as it turns out, even self-proclaimed HOA queens have to answer to the law. And Ethan? Well, Ethan was done playing nice, the calm before the storm. After Carl was arrested, you'd think Susan might lay low, apologize, hide her surveillance signs, and maybe, I don't know, do some soul-searching. Nope, she doubled down, sent out a mass HOA newsletter titled, "Maintaining Order in Times of Disruption." She accused us of aggressive behavior, Ethan of staging a false flag incident, and implied our unpatriotic actions were threatening community safety. Unpatriotic? She was accusing a Special Forces veteran who served 4 combat tours of unpatriotism. The woman had gall, I'll give her that. But that email, oh, that glorious email, was her biggest mistake yet, because she didn't just send it to the neighborhood. She CC'd the entire county board and Ethan's lawyer. Yes, he has a lawyer now. That's right. Ethan hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, either a bulldog civil rights attorney who specializes in HOA overreach and unlawful surveillance. Turns out, what Susan and her clipboard had been doing wasn't just annoying, it was illegal. Using community funds for unauthorized purchases, illegal. Installing surveillance equipment aimed at private property without consent, illegal. Falsifying board votes by manipulating proxies, deeply illegal. Ethan and the attorney compiled everything. The fake citations, the doctored budgets, the footage of Susan trespassing on other people's yards, the HOA rulebook that Susan rewrote herself, complete with conflicting dates and forged digital timestamps. They even subpoenaed HOA financial records and discovered something truly golden. Susan had been paying herself a management stipend every month for 3 years, totaling over $18,000 unapproved, unauthorized, undeclared. Boom. The HOA hearing that became a public spectacle. When the county finally called a hearing, it was supposed to be closed door, but word got out. So many residents from Willow Creek Estates showed up that they had to move it to the town library's auditorium, folding chairs everywhere, people holding printouts of fines. One guy brought his dead gnome as evidence. Ethan sat front row. Susan walked in, wearing pearls like she was on trial for tax evasion in a Netflix miniseries. She brought 2 manila folders and 0 remorse. But what she didn't bring? A lawyer. Because Susan still thought she could talk her way out of it. Big mistake. Jason speaks, and the room turns. The room was silent when Ethan stood. He didn't yell, didn't get emotional, just calmly laid out every violation with documentation, timestamps, and visual evidence. He played a short video montage from neighbor submissions, Carl shouting at residents, Susan ripping up someone's Halloween decorations at 2 a.m., an HOA board meeting, where Susan voted 3 times for herself using forged proxies. People gasped. One lady clutched her pearls. Susan started sweating. Then Ethan handed the panel a folder titled Chronology of HOA Abuse, Willow Creek Estates, 2020-2024. Inside, screenshots of threatening emails, audio recordings, the financial trail of the misappropriated funds, even a whistleblower letter from a former HOA treasurer Susan had bullied out 2 years earlier. That was the final nail, the verdict. The panel recessed for 40 minutes. When they returned, the lead investigator didn't sugarcoat it. Susan Mitchell, you are hereby removed from your position on the Willow Creek Estates HOA board, effective immediately. Further investigation will be handled by the district attorney's office. Susan stood up. You can't do this to me. I built this community. The room erupted with applause. Someone yelled, you built it on lies. Someone else held up a sign that read, how free the bird feeders. Even Muffin, her schnauzer, barked. Okay, I made that part up, but I like to think Muffin was on our side. Susan stormed out. Her clipboard fell off her arm on the way. She left it behind. Nobody gave it back. HOA reform and a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, things changed fast. A temporary board was appointed. Ethan was asked to join, but he declined, said he just wanted peace and bird watching. The neighborhood voted to revise all the bylaws, remove the ornamental restrictions, legalize normal-sized trucks, allow bird feeders, even reinstate decorative flamingos with no questions asked. A full audit was launched into the HOA finances. Charges were filed against Susan for embezzlement and fraud. Carl lost his badge permanently. And us? We planted a second flagpole, one with the POW MIA banner, right next to the American flag. Susan tried to move to another neighborhood, but apparently the story followed her. She's currently renting a condo in a development with no HOA. Imagine that. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in Willow Creek Estates, it came with a gavel, a court transcript, and a community newsletter titled, "Welcome Back, Sanity." After Susan's dramatic downfall at the HOA hearing, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd be wrong, because, like any true Susan, she wasn't going down without filing something. Yep, you guessed it, Susan's final act, the great defamation lawsuit of 2024. Exactly 2 weeks after being removed from the HOA board, Susan filed a civil lawsuit against the entire neighborhood, claiming defamation of character, emotional distress, and I kid you not, loss of future leadership opportunities. She demanded $250,000 in damages, said her reputation had been unfairly destroyed, that the videos shared online were edited to vilify her, that Ethan orchestrated a campaign to ruin her life. The case made it to the county court system, and once again, Ethan showed up not as a defendant, but as a witness for the community's legal team. Because this time, Susan wasn't up against one family. She was up against everyone. The trial, Susan versus common sense. The trial lasted 4 days. Day 1, Susan's lawyer claimed she was the victim of an internet mob fueled by misinformation. Day 2, the HOA's lawyer, backed by over 30 residents, showed evidence of illegally signed checks, forged proxy ballots, unauthorized surveillance camera placement, misuse of HOA funds, including $600 spent on presidential nameplates, and, of course, the infamous birdfeeder email, which somehow got leaked online and became a meme. Day 3, Ethan testified. Not bitter, not angry, just calm. He explained how he served overseas for freedom, only to come home and watch a power-hungry neighbor chip away at that same freedom with forms, fines, and fake authority. He ended with this: "I didn't fight for this country so someone with a clipboard could tell my mother what color garden hose she's allowed to use." The courtroom went silent. Even the judge paused. Day 4, the judge ruled. Susan's case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile. But that wasn't all. The court ordered her to pay $18,400 in legal fees to the HOA, every penny she'd once stolen in stipends, returned with interest. Her bank account was frozen, her condo lease terminated. Her LinkedIn page mysteriously disappeared. Willow Creek Estates had officially Susan-proofed itself. The aftermath, rebuilding more than yards. With Susan gone, the neighborhood didn't just bounce back, it bloomed. The new HOA board, made up of real neighbors, volunteers, people who actually liked living there, not ruling it through a block party, the first in years. Kids rode bikes again. Dogs barked freely. Gnomes made a triumphant return, Elvis and all. Ethan declined a seat on the board again, said he preferred being in the background. But at the party, someone handed him a handmade sign that read, "HOA Eagles Hero of the Area." He laughed, hung it on our front porch next to the flag. Even Buddy, our ancient golden retriever, seemed lighter on his paws. And as for our bird feeder, still hanging, still attracting blue jays and hummingbirds, still 100% HOA compliant. Not that anyone checks anymore. Susan's legacy, or lack thereof, rumor has it. Susan tried to move to a gated community in Arizona, didn't make it past the interview. Apparently someone Googled her name, found the HOA hearing footage, the court ruling, the bird feeder memes. Let's just say she's laying low now, somewhere far away, hopefully clipboard free. One last walk. A few weeks later, Ethan and I took a walk around the block, no drama, just dusklight, cicadas, and the occasional sprinkler clicking on. We passed by the spot where Carl once pulled a gun. Now it's a community herb garden. We waved to the Clarks. They were grilling. Mrs. Larson was on her porch, rocking gently with her cat. Ethan stopped under the old oak, looked up at the bird feeder, then at me. "Funny how peace feels louder than chaos," he said. I nodded, "especially when you had to fight for it." He smiled. "Let's keep it this way. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after a long, ridiculous, clipboard-fueled war. The kind of peace where you finally sit on your porch without wondering if you're in violation of some obscure shade of beige rule. Where bird feeders swing freely, garden gnomes stand tall, and the only thing in your mailbox is junk mail, not fines. But even now, with the sun setting over a quieter, happier Willow Creek estates, I still think about it. I think about how close we came to letting one person, just one, twist the neighborhood into fear. And I think about the lessons we learned. Because this wasn't just about Susan. This was about what happens when we stop paying attention, when we assume that someone with a clipboard and a title has our best interests at heart, when we let apathy win. Lesson 1. Power loves a vacuum. Susan didn't take control of the HOA. We gave it to her by not showing up, by not voting, by rolling our eyes at the rules and thinking, it's just a bird feeder, who cares? Well, Susan cared. And that's exactly how she turned lawn care into legislation. If your neighborhood has an HOA, or is thinking about starting one, be there. Know your bylaws. Read the minutes. Ask who's signing the checks. Because bad rules aren't born overnight. They're slipped into existence when no one's looking. Lesson 2. Susan doesn't win if you document everything. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't throw punches. He made a paper trail. Every photo, every email, every shady vote recorded, printed, time-stamped. And when it mattered, it wasn't his word against hers. It was proof against performance. So, if you're dealing with a petty tyrant in khakis, keep records, because the one thing louder than their voice is their own actions on paper. Lesson 3. Community beats control. The reason Susan fell wasn't because of one man. It was because the community woke up. The Clarks, the Thompsons, sweet Miss S. Larson folks who'd been quiet for too long finally said, enough. And once neighbors talk, tyrants fall. So, build community before you need it. Host potlucks. Talk to the guy 2 doors down. Share garden tools, stories, coffee. Because organized neighbors are Susan's worst nightmare. Lesson 4. Justice moves slow, but it moves. Let's be honest. It felt like Susan was untouchable for a long time. And maybe you're reading this, thinking, there's a Susan in my neighborhood, and nothing ever happens to her. But trust me, time, evidence, and the law, they catch up. Not always fast, not always loud, but when it hits hard. Now it's your turn. Tell us your HOA story. So, I've told you mine. Now I want to hear yours. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you dealt with a Susan in your neighborhood? What's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever seen? Or were you on an HOA board and tried to fix the mess? We read every single story. And who knows, your HOA horror tale might just be the next one we tell. So, go ahead, share it below. Let's build a community of people who know the difference between enforcing rules and enforcing egos. And if you got a laugh, a chill, or a little satisfaction from watching Susan fall, give this story a like, share it with a neighbor, and subscribe for more HOA tales you won't believe actually happened, but they did. Thanks for listening. And remember, some wars are fought on battlefields, others on lawns, and sometimes the strongest weapon is a well-placed bird feeder.